very warm welcome to everybody watching this evening. I am Samantha Castle, the Senior Manager for Alumni Relations at the University of Pretoria. Tonight, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to another informative and engaging edition of LeadUP online virtual chats. For those of you joining us for the first time tonight, LeadUP Online is a series of virtual panel discussions among our well-renowned UP academic staff and alumni situated in South Africa and across the globe. Each session, we look to address topical issues of public interest that are affecting our society today. We'd love to engage with you over social media, so I encourage you to comment on tonight's session and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. We really do appreciate your ongoing support. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Professor Tawana Kupe, who will be our moderator for this evening. So without further ado, let us kick off tonight's discussion. Please enjoy.
Good evening to everyone. Of course, it could be also good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are sitting as alumni. Welcome to LeadUP in conversation with the VC Alumni Virtual Chat. This event's tagline is International Relations Strategies for Strengthening South Africa's Reputation on the Global Stage. Tonight, I'll be chatting to the Honourable Minister, Dr Naledi Pandor, who is the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation and a UP graduate, as well as Dr Sithembile Mbete, a UP graduate and senior lecturer in UP's Political Sciences Department. Of course, the event is brought to you by the University of Pretoria, and the panelists will be joining our UP associates. So you are all alumni, we are all family. I've introduced our two speakers. Now I would like to indicate to you where you need to put your comments in the chat or go to slido.com and using @LeadUP 10 March. And then you can put in your comments and questions there. The technical staff will channel the questions to me. Now I'm going to go to our panelists and ask them ask them a series of questions, and then we'll have a discussion. First questions to you, my very honored alumni. I'm proud of both of you as your Vice-Chancellor and Principal. I boast about you wherever I can. My colleagues, the Vice-Chancellor, struggle to bring up similar alumni of similar profile. But I just want to know, why did you choose to do your PhDs at UP? I'll start with you, Dr. Naledi Pandor.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone who's joining us. It's evening in South Africa. Well, reason number one was accessibility. The university is located in the capital city of South Africa, de facto, and I work in Pretoria, and I needed an institution that I would be able to access. That was one. But two, it was reputation. The university was recommended to me. I did a lot of research before deciding where to apply to do a doctorate. And I spoke to many, many colleagues, and it was intriguing that a lot of them were directing me toward the University of Pretoria, given my area of interest. I was keen to work in the area of education policy, and particularly higher education, and several colleagues in the academic sector said to me, there are people at the University of Pretoria who really know what you're talking about, approach that institution. And then the last point was, I had met Professor Jonathan Jansen, who boasted to me about how successful the education faculty of the University of Pretoria is in supporting postgraduate students and supporting them to actually achieve their ambition. South Africa sometimes has a very low throughput of postgraduate students. Jonathan Jansen told me that Pretoria doesn't suffer from that particular negative, and that they would provide someone like myself, an adult, a mature student, with support, and that I would indeed be able to pursue my postgraduate interests to success. So those are some of my reasons.
Okay, no, thank you very much. So, Dr. Mbete, you also did PhD at the University of Pretoria. Why did you choose the University of Pretoria? Why didn't you go to WITS, UCT? You are a graduate of UCT for your master's, I remember.
Indeed, I am. Thank you, Prof. Kupe, and thank you to everyone who has joined us on this call. So I, similarly, I suppose, to the minister, was working in government. I was working in the presidency at the time that I applied for a doctorate at the University of Pretoria. And so part of the rationale was convenience, because it would be, I would be able to access university resources after work. But the primary reason was to work with my supervisor, Professor Maxi Skuman, who at the time was the head of the Department of Political Sciences and is one of the most prolific and well-respected international relations scholars that South Africa has produced. And very rarely in South African international relations is a woman. And so I had been reading her work since my undergraduate days at UCT, and somebody advised that she would be a great person to work with for my doctoral study, which was looking at South Africa's previous 2 terms in the United Nations Security Council. And so when I approached her, she was very eager to work with me. And then I became very conscious of all the other benefits of doing a doctorate in international relations in the capital city and also the diplomatic hub of South Africa. So in the time of my doctorate, I had access to every embassy, to the United Nations office in South Africa itself, to the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, to really be able to have all the resources I need to do my PhD. And so it was really the best choice for me, and I'm very glad that it's one that I made.
Okay, I understand also your department teaches a course in a master's in diplomatic studies, and there is that center which I still want activated to teach diplomacy. So what do you teach to produce South Africa's graduates? And would you say that you have contributed to, providing well-educated, well-trained, knowledgeable diplomats for our Department of International Relations and Cooperation? I'm asking you first, then I'll ask the minister whether she finds people you have trained to be up to what she needs to do her job.
Indeed, and I think that our department does this in 2 ways. So we have the students that join us from undergraduate, the first years, like the ones we were doing orientation with yesterday online, who join us in first year and go through their undergraduate degrees and their honors, and sometimes right up to masters and PhD with us in the department. And the way in which we prepare those students is to not only provide them with the theoretical underpinnings of international relations and teach them all of the content and the work that they need, and to know about the United Nations and the African Union and the principles of diplomacy. But what we also do is, through the events that we host as a department, really provide students with direct access to diplomats that are already working in the field. And so our department, because it has such close relations with the diplomatic community in Pretoria, many of our students are able to do internships, to the diplomatic community in Pretoria, and so they get kind of a practical experience while they are studying, which is hugely beneficial to them and really helps them to be able to understand the world of diplomacy in practice, not just in theory, while they are students. And I think that means that we have very capable students that then go out into the job market. And then the second way that that our department contributes to the training of diplomats is by professionals that are already in the system, that are working in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, but also in other international relations units in other departments within our government, and that we provide them with professional training to really polish the skills that they already have and to enhance their abilities to work as diplomats representing the South African government. But what we also have is that we have a number of our postgraduate students that are diplomats that are working for other countries that choose to do their master's degrees at the University of Pretoria while they are posted in South Africa, because the qualification is a well-respected one internationally, and they feel that we really provide them with an expertise and with polish that they otherwise would not have. So I think that both with existing professionals and with our new students, we have contributed, I think, to this diplomatic sector, not just in South Africa, but internationally.
Okay. So, Minister, of course, I mean, it's not the University of Pretoria. I would love it if it was a monopoly that my university only trained all diplomats, but they're trained elsewhere in South Africa's 26 public universities. How do you find the quality in general of our training in South Africa's public universities of diplomats that you need to do the job that you do?
Well, I have found that we have many very talented young people in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation who've attended the various universities in our country. I just want to return to the earlier question in replying to you and say that I think one of the characteristics that a diplomat would have to have is both an understanding of the present, but also an appreciation of the past, because this shapes South Africa, and they must understand that as diplomats, they represent our country. And I think being at the University of Pretoria, you're immersed both in the past, in the present, and in the future, because it's a university remaking itself from our experience of apartheid and apartheid higher education. So the institution can help us in shaping a diplomat who has a diverse set of very unique qualities. Not many countries want you educated on your history in order to reflect who and what your country is. And I think the University of Pretoria provides this in its international relations program, as I've been told by many young people. I also am aware that the university, from my engagement with past leaders of the institution, is very committed to multidisciplinarity. And this is very, very vital. Our diplomats have to speak science, economics, humanities, politics. So they cannot be narrow in their training. They have to come in with a broad understanding of a wide range of intellectual matters. Finally, the worst form of training for a diplomat would be in a university with a very hegemonic character, where you don't have a cosmopolitan presence of academics and students. And I think the university offers this attribute of an inclusion of academics and students from many different parts of the world. And then that mix, it being a diplomatic capital, is very, very important, because we can suffer at times from insularity. and imagine that we should base our opinions and interaction on our sense of self. But I think when you have the opportunity to experience beyond yourself, you build a very valuable set of characteristics which allow you then to be able to really make the world your place. And I think the university, and I must say other universities as well, not just Pretoria, several South African universities do offer very good international relations programs. But given that we're close to UP, we are in our own diplomatic academy, do have very strong partnerships with the university and its various departments. And we utilize that strength to help improve our own training of nominees who will be posted abroad.
So let's just say we are the premier diplomatic training university, but others do other training too. So let me move towards the sort of the focus of the question around strategies for positioning South Africa on the global stage. The one thing I post about everywhere in the world, and my friends ask me, is just the name of the ministry, Department of International Relations and Cooperation, not Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Ministry of External Relations like I see in other countries. Now, I think I've been asked to explain this, and I never bothered to ask any minister. I decided to explain it on my own. I said it was a progressive move. Foreign affairs is very, very strange. What do you mean by foreign? But international relations and cooperation connotes something that also means multilateralism, pursuing a good goal in the public interest. Now, today I have a chance to get corrected. Was I right in saying so? And how is this expressed in the actual practice of our relating to other countries on the globe, including countries on our continent?
Thank you very much for that. I think in the practice of building international collaboration and partnerships, the government realized that the practice of diplomacy is very, very broad, much more than what we may make of it. And that we're both building friendships, but also building partnerships. We're seeking to assist us in addressing our own unique challenges, but also building the ability to help others address their own. So we cooperate internationally and also ensure that we build friendly relations. So it's a broader set of demands that would have to be responded to by the department. So bilateral interests are very, very important, but the bilateral without the multilateral would be a problem. The friendship without economic diplomacy won't assist South Africa in its economic objectives. The North-South without the South-South is immaterial. So really it was to have a sense of ensuring that there is a name that gives credence to the complex and broad aspect of the work that this department has to undertake. One day I may be having a friendly conversation with the Deputy Prime Minister in Turkmenistan. On another day, I'm speaking to a colleague just next door, and we talk the same language. So the issues we might address are very different. And then on a third day, I'm trying to assist a potential South African investor in another country to overcome barriers that she has come across in that country. So it's very much a very wide reach of tasks that this ministry has to address.
Yeah. So, Sithembile, do you think now, as a political analyst and a scholar of international relations, do you think the intention behind the name, international relations and cooperation, has actually been realized?
Well, that's a tough question. I think that certainly what you can't get away from is the international context, the global context within which South Africa operates. And in many ways, it is one of conflict, of competition, and of decisions being made in national interests or in particular state interests, and not for the global good or for the reasons of cooperation. And so for a country like South Africa to pursue that kind of cooperative engagement internationally is immensely difficult, because international relations are still governed in many ways by power dynamics and by strategic interests. And so I think that while that has been the goal that South Africa has pursued, it is often not as successful in its results as the minister and diplomats would like it to be. I think a particular case in point at the moment is the world, South Africa and India have put it through an application for a waiver, an intellectual property waiver on COVID-19 medicines and equipment, in order to make those a public good that can be used equally across the world for all countries to be able to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And that application is being opposed by the European Union, by Japan, and a group of pharmaceutical companies today have written a letter to the US President Joe Biden to urge his administration to continue opposing that application. And so, I think that that's just an example of the kind of environment that South Africa has to operate in. And so there's a mixed record, really, of success in terms of pursuing the kind of foreign policy that the minister has outlined.
But what you are saying is that it is not for South Africa's lack of trying. It is for other, because you can try and your intention can be good, but the counter effect from others might actually dent your own aim. But you agree that our I don't like the word foreign policy, our international relations intent is good and would promote multilateralism if successful. Minister? No, go ahead. Okay,
Sithembile. I would say that it is usually good, but of course, South Africa is a state like other states, and we have situations where we are driven by those state interests rather than our better inclinations and ideals. And so we have also seen South Africa engage internationally in security situations, sometimes on the in multilateral forums, in a way that is just like other states to protect its own interests. And so I think that often, and I know you don't like the word foreign policy, but I think often the stated foreign policy of states is about their better selves, their highest ideals. But in diplomatic practice, that often falls short. And I think that South Africa isn't any different to other states in that respect.
Yeah. Okay. Minister, do you want to respond to that? Then there's a question from Buhle about, does DECO get involved in addressing violence against foreign nationals? And are there any public awareness programs?
Well, let me say that Dr. Mbete is right. We are, perhaps comparable to other countries, but I would believe we are different. South Africa has not gone to war against any country. We've not practiced any negative, with respect to ethnic cleansing led by the state, etc. In fact, it's something we abhor as government. And we have tried in international fora to uphold respect for multilateralism and for human rights, democracy, and good governance. We've not succeeded on all accounts, and it would be implausible to imagine that we would. We are not a sort of Leviathan, that has all sorts of power as yet. And I think we are working hard to ensure that we do build a stronger African consensus on a range of issues so that we can bring a far stronger lobby than we're often able to bring into the global stage. On this WTO temporary waiver, I think the temporary is important. We have managed to persuade all African countries to support the application brought by India and South Africa. And there are over 100 countries that are supporting this call for a temporary waiver in the context of the fight against COVID-19. So I think it's an important moment, both for the WTO and for the world. And it would be great if civil society could also marshal behind this call, because it cannot be that we are not allowed access to productive capacity for those treatments that will help us to combat this disease. The fact of not having this ability renders us less able to respond to the pandemic. So I think it's a very important call. And even if we do not succeed, the fact that it's on the table, that we are debating it, and that it is the wealthy countries that are objecting, is a very important signal to the world. And South Africa must continue. I mentioned it to the EU ambassadors yesterday. I continue to argue for this. And I think we must just pursue this battle. I do think the matter of pharmaceutical companies and their weight and control over access to treatments and diagnostics is really something we as activists must give greater attention to. So indeed, yes, there are failings, but sometimes it's also a matter of strategy. It's a matter of the time. It's a matter of where you are, because diplomacy is not a static one-line matter that, there is this issue, you can respond to it in this way. As Dr. Mbete is saying, there may be issues of national interest. It might be 4,000 jobs versus a signature on a particular document. So, you have to consider all that. And sometimes you weigh it up and you say, no, I don't care, sorry. And other times you say, no, actually, this won't lose us anything. I can't give you the particular instances, but they do arise. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now to the subject of your PhD, Dr. Mbete, and the Minister, the matter of the Security Council. So we've had a number of stints there. We just came off the Security Council. By the way, also last night when I was just channel surfing, I bumped on the president talking at one of those 75th anniversaries. And he said that multilateralism has been weakened, and I quote him, he says that it needs to be emboldened. But I didn't realize they were still doing the 75-year anniversaries, because Minister and I, as you remember, Sithembile, we were in a panel last year to do that. So I was a little surprised and thought my TV had rewinded to last year. But anyway, he made a number of strong statements around weakening of multilateralism, needing it to be strengthened. Second, he spoke about vaccine nationalism and a number of those things. But my question really is around what have we achieved in our stints when we've been in the Security Council. We just came off now. And also, I presume we are part of the lobby to democratize or expand the Security Council. If, for example, that happened and the rest of the continent said, South Africa, represent us in the expanded Security Council, what would we achieve by being in that body?
Well, I hope South Africa would lead in its democratization, because I'm not absolutely certain that having a body of small number of member states of the United Nations is the most appropriate mechanism of global governance. So I believe that in the discussions about reform of the United Nations, we need to broaden beyond permanent membership of the Security Council. and actually look at matters of where are the final decisions made, which decisions might be forwarded from that smaller body into the General Assembly for voting by the broader membership and so on. So there are larger questions. But certainly, while the Security Council is composed as it is, we do believe that there should be more permanent members, and that the world has altered from 1947, and that we have to have cognizance of Asia in particular, and Africa and Latin America, and that the composition of the Security Council must be altered visibly. We would take our agenda, which is one of focusing on development, addressing issues of poverty and inequality, which mar, in particular, the African continent, as key issues that we would take into that particular forum. I also believe that there's been resistance to full discussion on reform because certain regions of the world and countries have old enmities which enter into the fray as Africa tries to advance a progressive deliberation on reform of the United Nations. We've got to insist and continue to argue that we want detailed deliberations, text-based, on reform of the UN mechanisms, because I think that will be the only way that we're going to see progress. On the matter of the fight against abuse and violence against foreign nationals in our country, as DIRCA, we have been very clear and categorical that this is a disgraceful part of a character that we have in some parts of our community, in our country. And it's a criminal, we think, matter, but we also have to educate, as South Africans, our people, to learn to be more accepting of others and less fearful and angry toward those who come into our country seeking refuge and assistance from South Africa and South Africans. So I think we need to do more popular or civic education. We try to do so in a really not a very robust manner. It's something that I think we need to consider more deeply. We have diplomatic fairs where our embassies open up to the broader community, but I think we should have more outreach. We are working on such strategies, more civic education in partnership with non-governmental organizations working in the sector. I also believe that what we need to do using universities and research institutions is to have a deeper understanding of what is it that makes some South African communities so negative. What is the actual underlying reason? Because we treat it, sometimes in a cavalier fashion, and we tend to look at the incidents rather than to probe the underlying causes and how they might be addressed, and how indeed we could build greater alliances between Africans in South Africa.
Yeah. Sithembile, well, if you're on CNN, they would have that banner that calls UN Security Council expert and analyst. So, as the expert and analyst, can you say what is South Africa's achievement in those stints in the Security Council, and also your views on Security Council and UN reform in general?
Thanks very much, Prof, for that question. So, Firstly, I think that we must never forget, and the Minister alluded to it, that the UN Security Council represents the balance of global power at the end of the Second World War, 1945. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council were in effect the winners of the Second World War and were able to shape the post-Second World War world order, and did that through their permanent membership of the Security Council and their veto power. And I always argue, and I argue this in my PhD, that the real power of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council is their permanence more than it is the veto. Because incumbency, anybody on the call who studied game theory, repeated games, are better for a player because they allow you to spread your risk than a once-off, than being in a game once-off. And the 5 members of the Security Council, because they are there every day, all day, they build relationships with the Secretariat, they have institutional memory, they make deals with each other over decades, even if in the actual televised meetings, they will be very acrimonious. But there's all sorts of deals and negotiating that's happened behind the scenes over a long time that then informs the decisions that they're making on a particular issue. And so for a country like South Africa that serves in the council as an elected member for 2 years at a time, there is a lot that the elected members don't actually know about what's going on behind the scenes, and they have a very short amount of time to be caught up. And so part of the reform of the Security Council is around shifting those power dynamics and making the Security Council reflect the distribution of global power in 2021, 75, about to be 76 years after the UN was formed. And so talking then about South Africa's achievements, I think that South Africa served on the Security Council in 2007 and 2008, 2011 and 2012, and then in 2019 and 2020. And that a rapid succession of terms, I think, has allowed South Africa to build up an institutional memory and a sophistication, I think, in making decisions that other elected members, certainly from the African continent, have not had the opportunity to have. And so what that's allowed for is for South Africa to continue with a kind of an extension of its agenda over time. So in one of the big achievements for South Africa has been making the UN Security Council's work closer to the work of the AU Peace and Security Council. So there are now annual meetings that take place between the UN Security Council and the African Union. And they alternate. Some years they're in New York, other years they are in Addis Ababa. This year they've been online. Well, in the past year they've been online. But these meetings mean that there is greater consultation and involvement of African states in the decisions of the Security Council about African issues, which is really which has been hugely helpful and is something that the whole African continent has really galvanized around. The second success that I want to mention that South Africa has had is around issues of women, peace and security, particularly, I think, in this period, in this last term. When at the presidency of Donald Trump, the United States was quite hostile to issues around women, peace and security, especially to do with reproductive health and sexual violence. And South Africa drove a process in 2019 that led to a resolution 2493 to commemorate the 20 years of the Women, Peace and Security agenda at the United Nations, but also to really get commitment from all UN Security Council members states to the full fulfillment or full implementation of that agenda. And I think that was a huge victory for South Africa. And then the final thing I want to mention is that particularly in the past 2 years, South Africa, with countries such as Germany, who also served at the Security Council at the same time, managed to achieve far greater cooperation between the elected 10 members of the Security Council, who were then almost able to balance out the interests of the permanent members and to work as a bloc. And particularly the 3 African members of the Security Council really cooperated with each other and worked as a bloc to be able to push the interests of the African continent, but to also balance out or try to balance out the power of the permanent 5 members. But of course, as I've said, because you don't have incumbency on your side as an elected member, you can push for those reforms for 2 years, but you have no guarantee that they're going to be carried forward beyond that time. And given, I just want to end with this, the formation of the League of Nations, the formation of the United Nations, all happened after world wars. After the First World War, you had the League of Nations. After the Second World War, you had the United Nations. And so these big, life-changing, world-changing events lead to massive changes in multilateralism and in the way that we engage with each other on the world stage. And one hopes that COVID-19 is that kind of rupture that will force the kind of changes that have been called for many decades by African states, but also other states in the global south.
Well, that also sounded like if there was limited expansion of permanent members, you seem to have made a motivation that South Africa should benefit from one of those seats on behalf of the continent. But that's a comment, not a question. So, Bongeka is a question for the minister. In what ways can students or alumni with a background in international relations and a foreign language get involved with DECO?
Well, annually, DERCO offers internships for young graduates and takes on a number of young graduates for a minimum of 2 years into a program within the department. Unfortunately, we have had to cut down the numbers given the budgetary constraints that confront government at present. But I think the international experience is not just needed in DERCO. I think it applies in environment, fisheries and forestry. I also think it applies in the trade and industry domain and several others, defense, state security and so on. And all of these government departments do have internship opportunities because this is a national program of government. You have the African Peer Review Mechanism located within the Department of Public Service and Administration. So what young people should do is really Google, visit the department's websites, get to know more about these intakes of interns and make use of those opportunities. Finally, the education system is introducing international languages more and more. And so young graduates should not neglect the idea of teaching international or foreign languages in the South African education system, because part of our engagement with the rest of the world is the ability to parler français and other languages. So I think it's very important that we don't see international training as preparing us for DERCO. There'd be far too many of us there. Even the tourism sector, I've often found when I walk into a store that there's a tourist who is struggling to make themselves understood because there isn't a foreign language speaker employed in the facility, even some hotels. So it's a broad range of opportunities that such graduates could have access to.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask both of you is perhaps a difficult question. What if you like, difficulties the South African diplomacy faced in relating to fellow African countries and nations?
Shall I kick off?
Yes, sure.
I think from my understanding or experience, a large part of the problem is we have a very, very different constitutional makeup from a large part of the continent. And we tend to approach issues on the basis of the framework that is ours, and don't understand that other countries don't operate on the same basis. So, you would have, for example, I was dealing with one matter, a business person detained in a country, no charges for 2 weeks, and then released suddenly, and not sure what was actually going on. That would not happen in South Africa. Now, when you try and raise this, you're sort of told all sorts of weird things about, tax wasn't paid or what. But, you say, no, but you can't keep somebody, for 2 weeks and they don't have access to the mission and so on. So I think first the constitutional framework is very different, and South Africans think everybody is the same. And so even our analysts, when they analyze our interaction with the continent, they say, oh, Minister Pandor was very mild with Zimbabwe, as though Zimbabwe is a sort of semi-state of South Africa, a province of South Africa. It's a country, itself. So you get that sort of thing. Why are you not commenting on Uganda? Why don't you tell Museveni what he should do, etc.? So we imagine that South Africa is very big and can tell people, where to get off. We love our country, but there are bigger countries. There are relations that we need to obtain and sustain. And there is a mode of persuasion that we may have to engage in. And thus you have to keep the door open to ensure that you can persuade and arrive at difference. So I found that the difficulty is the expectation that everybody understands issues and approaches them the way we do.
Okay. Analyst, what do you say?
I think certainly the fact that South Africa was one of the last countries in Africa to gain independence in terms of, gaining freedom from apartheid and transforming into a democracy in 1994. I think that certainly does mean that while South Africans think that we are very important and, senior members of the African continent, South Africa is considered in many places as one of the junior players on the continent, and South African officials and diplomats are treated in that way in engagements. I think the second thing, just to pick up on something that the minister had said, is that South Africa, because of the many years of isolation, but I think even after 1994, is very insular. So South Africans have very little understanding of how life is in other African countries. And indeed, if you speak to people about where they're going on holiday, people will go to Thailand when we could still go on holiday. People would go to Thailand or to Europe or to the US. But you don't have many South Africans that travel the continent and that really get to know about what life is in the other 53 countries that make up the African continent. And so South Africans tend to know a lot less about other Africans than other Africans know about South Africa. And I think that places us at a disadvantage. It means that a lot of our interaction with the continent can actually come across as very clumsy. And then the final thing is that I think that while we must also think of the other 54 countries on the continent, we must forget that there are many other countries that are interested in Africa, in African resources, in being able to influence what happens on the African continent. And so South Africa then competes strategically, not just with Nigeria or Ethiopia or Kenya or Rwanda, but it also competes with the United Arab Emirates and Israel and China and India and Brazil and Turkey and the United States and Great Britain and France, etc. and Russia. And so there are so many competing interests in the African continent. And I think that certainly the South African public sometimes overstates or overestimates what South Africa can do in continental relations. And I think that, something that we should really be encouraging is for South Africans to get to know more about the rest of the continent. Read Ethiopian literature, listen to Kenyan music. We all watch Nigerian films, which is great. But I think that we need to have a lot more of that kind of knowledge sharing and cultural interaction for us to really understand this continent that we're just at the tip of. We're a very tiny part of Africa.
So it's also still in that vein, it's still interesting that people will say those who go on holiday or on business or to other countries on our continent, they say they are going to Africa, which begs the question, where are they coming from? So I often say to people, well, you have not left the continent, so just tell me where you're going. So, anyway, so the stuff you said now about culture and all of that was led me into my next question. Has South Africa sufficiently used this economic and cultural diplomacy, the soft power kind of stuff for culture? Because also there are people like South African music, South African soapies, DSTV penetrated the continent and all of that. I agree, of course. I mean, you still have to compete with Hollywood and in the French African countries with also stuff coming from French television. But if we used our cultural soft power enough to become acceptable or to become closer and cooperate more with other African countries?
I think we did so in the inception of democracy. We certainly had many South African artists out there, and also our interest in cultural institutions was much stronger at the work we did with the Timbuktu manuscripts, for example, and the role we played in their recovery and in ensuring that they were restored. So there was a much stronger use of cultural diplomacy. The recent review that was initiated by the former Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, highlighted in its report that they had noticed a significant decline in cultural diplomacy by South African policy practitioners. And so it is something that I've asked the department to give attention to. But I think as we deliberate on these matters, always at the back of my mind are the constant cuts that my government is confronted, my department and our government indeed are confronted with, and thus an inability to make real on some of the opportunities. I've found some missions have even stopped celebrating Freedom Day in order to save money. And I've said, no, we can't do that. You must, at least, even if it's a small celebration, do something and showcase South African art and culture in some way during such events. But certainly the financial milieu has made life very, very difficult. I think there's a better presence of South African films and certainly books in the international community. Many of our writers are enjoying greater prominence. And of course, UP would know through Vice-Chancellor that our scientists are doing extremely well. They're really placing us on the global stage. I've had comments from foreign ministers admiring the fact that it was South African scientists who realized and discovered this variant of the COVID-19 in South Africa. And they're saying, gosh, we didn't know you had such capacity in your country. You know, we really would like to work with your scientists. So there are attributes that we haven't really shared with the world as much as we should. In the paleontology field, we are world renowned, but I think South Africans don't recognize that that field and discipline is one that ranks us among the best globally, because we don't make much of it in the country. So there are, corrections we need to make of communication, of interfacing with the broader South African public. And I think certainly a virtual such as this one is part of that correction in communication. Because South Africans have tended to be really good at recognizing the negative and really bad at seeing the positive. And we have to shift that in order to have a changed discourse about who we are and what we can do with our attributes.
So in relation to the African Union, so the African Union was actually born in Durban. I still remember those days when it was being transformed from the old OAU. I love the OAU, but by the time the AU in 2002 came into being, I did wish the OAU must go away now because it was no longer serving the purpose that it did. Remember, but I appreciate the OAU because I was born the same year as the OAU, and it led the liberation struggles of our continent. But what can South Africa say? Can South Africa say that it has further shaped the AU to be fit for purpose for a 21st century Africa? Or what is its influence in that domain? Dr. Sithembile.
Look, I think that the AU was formed in order to get over the old boys club that the OAU became. And I'm afraid that in many ways, the AU has become another old boys club that is really not as inclusive of young people, of women, as it should be in order to take the African continent into the future. So while there are these plans like Agenda 2063 and all sorts of great plans, I just don't think that the AU is really fit for purpose and is doing what it was envisioned to do, which is to aid in African cooperation, but also in African development. We have seen the African Free Trade Agreement be signed and come into effect in January, and hopefully that will, assist development on the continent. But I must say that as somebody who was 17 or 18 when the AU was formed, it has been a real disappointment actually for young people on the continent.
I think probably, 2 years ago, I might have agreed partially with Dr. Mbete, but I fundamentally disagree because I've got to see in detail the work that the African Union does. And it's not working in the easiest of environments. You can't separate institutions from context. And Africa is not the easiest of context. I, for example, was very pleased that at the summit we held in February this year, 85% of the members of the African Union had paid their dues to the organization. And I thought, my goodness, this is really something. And also talking of South Africa, the insertion of gender equality into the structures of the AU formally has been part of the mandate South Africa had been along with many other women. We shouldn't render women disempowered by some of what we say. We have a requirement of 50% in the commission, 50% women, 50% male. That requirement is being observed and is being achieved. And I've been really impressed by some of the women commissioners and the work that they're doing. For example, on COVID-19, the Commissioner on Social Matters was incredible, working with the heads of state and with ministers of health and finance. So don't undermine ourselves. This is my problem. This thing of the negative. I'm not saying lie because I don't like lies, but I am saying where good is being done, appreciate it. We have a very active infrastructure initiative that we are pursuing as members of the African Union. And country by country, you're seeing the change take place. Go and see the roads in Ghana now. Just look at what they're planning with respect to the rail infrastructure refurbishment. Go and see the port that has been built in Equatorial Guinea. Go and see what Togo is doing. So don't just look at the negative. It's not the best organization. We're not happy with some of the financial management. There are administrative failings, absolutely. But utter failure, no. able to be transformed? Yes. We must work at it and we must achieve those changes. Remember where we come from. And I think to change the continent will take energy, it will take durable people, and it will take commitment. We are the only ones who can have and are responsible for building our institutions. Nobody can do it for us. I'm thrilled at what President Ramaphosa achieved as chair in a very short time in a difficult year. The fact that we said to African leaders, and I was just saying this to His Excellency the other day, that we said to African countries, as South Africa, we believe the Center for Disease Control must play a critical role in providing support to Africa as we respond to COVID-19. To allow it to do so, South Africa is going to make a voluntary contribution to it. One by one, the heads of state said, we will match South Africa's contribution. And guess what? Those funds are beginning to reach the African CDC. And it will have a strong, because we must have a strong African Centers for Disease Control. But it takes us to do it, nobody else. And if we sit and say, oh, these guys, they're so corrupt, it won't happen. But if we say, look, we expect you to do the following, we want to attract talent. We've got Dr. Nkenga Song, he's playing a fantastic role. Let's give him all the backup. Let's make sure he's got the human capability. He's got the funding for the research. The data center is up to date. Let's help, because then you build up. But otherwise, so I'm not in any way excusing the failings. I'm worried about some of the irregular expenditure I see. I will continue to fight on that, but I don't think it's a useless organization.
Yeah. Sithembile, now, having heard that, won't you run for the AU commissioner or in the future in order partly to address the weak cases and take it to the next level?
I would be delighted to. I certainly would do so. And I am pleased and excited to hear what the minister's response was to my comment. And it is good to know that there are such developments. I do think that under President Ramaphosa last year, the AU's response with the Africa CDC to COVID-19 for the interests of the whole continent, I think was really well managed.
Yeah. On that positive note, I think notes, because the minister ended on a positive note, and so have you now, we'll end our conversation. I'm really delighted. This was really enriching, and I hope enriching to our alumni too. I'm tempted to have you back because there are questions I didn't ask. For example, do you think this guy Biden is really going to be any different fundamentally? So for part 2, we shall have part 2. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister. I know how busy you are.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you to everyone at home who listened. Thank you very much. Next one is coming soon. Thank you.
There are some places that will always be home. From the moment you took your first step onto the University of Pretoria's campuses, you've been part of our family. You've made friends, had a good time, fallen in and out of love, passed tests, failed some dismally, and started businesses. You had some great ideas. All the while, you made memories and learnt a lot. But in the end, you walked out of our gates a well-rounded person, someone committed to excellence. You still get things done the right way the first time. You've learned the value of innovation, mentoring, having a positive impact, and living a life based on strong morals, ethics, hard work, and responsibility. At the University of Pretoria, we're proud to call you part of our family. We're proud to be your alma mater, and we'd be delighted if you wanted to choose UP again to further your studies. Because even though we're the largest residential research university in South Africa, we're still your home. One thing we've learned over more than a century is that excellence is forever. We're still adamant in the high quality of our teaching and learning, and in the graduates that we produce. The more things change, the more they stay the same. UP will always be the home of Tux alumni.